first question we're going to ask you is if you could just describe your racial identity and your ethnicity.
I am half African American and half Asian.
And how educated do you feel about your racial identities? And do you think your parents helped or hindered that understanding?
Yeah, I feel like it's really unique for me because my parents are divorced and I don't really have contact with one of my parents, so I really only know about I guess about the African American side a lot more than the Asian side because my Asian parent isn't really in the picture.
And what experience have helped shape your understanding of your identity and also the way that you express it?
Yeah, I would say in my hometown we have these little I guess cultural get-togethers. So we like to call them oh, we're going to the Indian party or the Nigerian party. And it's a lot of the immigrants who all because we all live in the same town, and they'll get together and they'll have big house parties. And I feel at a lot of those gatherings, you get to hang out with the other immigrant kids, and you're just wow, OMG, and you get to talk about I don't know, you get to be really immersed in the culture just because you're actively living in it, you're playing Nigerian music and you're eating Indian food and stuff, and actively I guess just talking about things in the culture. And then all of the parents are there and you talk to them and they'll talk to you about their lives and stuff. And I feel that's been really big in just I guess learning the culture and understanding it, and then I guess living in it or practicing it.
Did your parents immigrate?
Yeah, both of my parents immigrated, so I'm the first gen American.
Oh wow,
Oh,
okay.
wow.
And where did your mom and dad immigrate from?
My dad immigrated from Nigeria and my mom immigrated from India.
And how do you kind of participate in your races? Do you feel more connected to one over the other?
I would definitely say I feel more connected to the black side or the Nigerian side, just because I don't know, I think people see me and they're oh, she's part black and something else, and I feel that's always the first thing that comes up. So that's always kind of the one where I'm yeah, I'm this. On standardized tests and stuff, in high school, the SAT, and they'd be oh, well, what race are you? I usually put, black, because I feel multiracial isn't always an option for a lot of those things. So I would say that, and then just because, that's the parent that I've been, raised by for most of my life, I'm, more connected with that side. And then in terms of, I guess, how I, interact with, the culture and stuff, I feel at Rice, not very much, just because, I don't know, I feel the Indian side, or I guess the Asian organizations, I've never really felt super comfortable going to them, because I'm I feel I definitely stand out, I guess. And then the Black Student Associations and stuff like that, I feel I'm loosely associated. I'll go to events and things, but I'm just that front, it's just me kind of being lazy, and I'm I kind of want to go home and I don't want to stay for this meeting at 9 p.m.
Yeah.
But I feel I try a bit harder there, and it's the vibes are chiller there.
I know that you said one of the first things people ask you is kind of about your racial background. How does that make you feel? Could we dive a little bit deeper into that?
Yeah. I feel I'm really used to it, so I'm kind of numb to it. When I was younger, people would be oh, what are you? Or where are you from? And stuff like that. And I'd be excuse me. But because it's happened so many times throughout the years, it doesn't really bother me as much, because I know people just don't know and are a little stupid, and that's why they're asking. And I don't think it really limits me from I guess participating in certain things. I'm just kind of okay, they're just asking because they don't know. So yeah.
Have you ever felt conflicted about your identity?
Yeah, definitely. I feel there are lots of stereotypes associated with each aspect of my identity. Nigerian kids, and the stereotypes about immigrant kids and stuff in general. And there's some overlap with Indian immigrant kids and all of that. And even in high school, I feel people would make jokes and they'd be oh my gosh, you're the perfect Nigerian/Indian kid, and I'd be what does that mean? And I feel just the way that I guess behave and stuff, I'm always very cognizant of is this a stereotype, or is this what people would expect of me? But then I'm why am I trying to act the way people would expect of me based on some outdated stereotype that's untrue? So yeah, I try not to let it affect me, but it definitely does.
Have you ever attempted to hide parts of your identity to fit in with certain groups?
I feel like not really, or maybe not consciously. Something else that I've also recently discovered at Rice is that a lot of people like don't know that I'm half Indian, and I feel like that's something that I'm pretty like open about. Like if people ask me, I'm like, yeah, I'm half Nigerian, half Indian, but I guess I don't like freely mention it, and then people would just like assume like, oh, she's black and maybe something else. So I wouldn't say I'm consciously trying to hide it, but maybe subconsciously.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think that monoracial groups view you as like a multi-racial person? I think you've kind of gone into it where you say they kind of just assume. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit
Yeah.
more?
I feel like it kind of depends on the group, or I guess like I don't know. I feel like Nigerians are a lot more accepting of the fact that I'm multiracial. Like it's never like a, oh, like what are you, where are you from, and stuff like that. But I'd say from like the Indian side, it's a very different story. Like I get a lot more of those like prodding questions, and like even when I go to like little Indian parties and stuff, I think people would just kind of like pick on me a little more almost. And I think Indians, like, or I guess at least the Indians I interacted with were like a lot more like culturally monolithic. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but like in a sense of like they want the culture to kind of remain with them and in their group. So like me being around was kind of weird. Like there were times that like even though I'm literally half Indian, like I wouldn't get invited to like certain Indian parties that like my other friends would go to. So definitely like a little like I guess icky on that end. But I feel like the Nigerians are like always very chill about it.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like that's just like a cultural difference?
I guess Nigeria has a lot of like subcultures, but so does India. Like they both have lots of subcultures. I just think maybe Nigeria is less like culturally cohesive because there are so many subcultures, and I think India is more culturally cohesive. Like for example, with like religion, like Nigerians, it's like half are Christian, almost half are Muslim, and then you have like all of the other like indigenous religions that have been there, versus in India, I feel like the big like majority religion is Hinduism, and then you'll have like a few Muslims. I don't remember the exact numbers, and then all of the smaller religions. And I think like that cohesion in India, I guess, makes it very different versus in Nigeria. I feel like people are more like, I don't know, spread out. Like most of my dad's friends, because I'm technically Muslim because he's Muslim, but like most of his friends from Nigeria aren't Muslims, and they're all like super duper chill and very like friendly, versus like India, like I know people who are like, yeah, no, my parents would never let me talk to a Muslim and stuff like that. And I feel like that also potentially plays a role.
Did you come into Rice feeling sure of your identity, and has that changed at all since you've been here?
I definitely don't think I came in super sure of my identity other than like, oh, I am half and half or whatever. Beyond that, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do at Rice in terms of like interacting with my identity and getting involved in like cultural groups. And I feel like I really wanted to get involved in lots of different groups and things, and I guess find myself a bit more. And I feel like I didn't really do that much, but I guess just through my time at Rice, I realized that I didn't need to do that. Like my identity is my identity, and if I want to like learn about it, I can, and that doesn't necessarily involve like going to like a cultural event and like learning how to do like a dance or something. Like it's how I want to interact with it. So I feel like I'm more sure of it now than when I was coming in.
Is it easy or more difficult to find an organization that you feel accepted and welcomed in?
I would say kind of. Like it's definitely dependent on like the group and then just my general like comfort level. But I don't know. I feel like some organizations just feel a bit more exclusionary just because it's like there's no one else that's really like you. So it was like even with like, or I guess with BSA it's like less common. I feel like there are a lot more like multiracial individuals there, But like with the Indian student associations and in general, a lot of the Asian student associations, they're not that many people who are multiracial. So when you show up and you like look different from everyone else, you're like, the point of this organization is that you kind of have everyone look kind of the same as you, and that's not really happening. So I feel like on that front, it's been harder to like, I guess, really find something, just because I still feel excluded, even though I'm not necessarily being excluded.
And with the multiracial individuals in like BSA, do you guys kind of share that experience with each other, or is it just kind of like unsaid but known, or how does that kind of play out?
I feel like I don't really interact with a lot of multiracial like people through BSA. It's just kind of like we're all kind of in it, but then during like separate interactions, it's something that comes up. Like I feel like when I do go to like BSA events, which is very rare, but when I do go, that's never really something that comes up. But I feel like we're all aware of each other's presence. And then it'll be like whenever we randomly see each other at like Chouse or something, and we'll talk, it'll like come up more and we'll talk about it.
Do you think Rice could do a better job of uplifting multiracial people on campus, or kind of like creating a space for that? Do you think that would be beneficial for that community?
Yeah, I think there should be more in terms of like maybe like educational / informational material in terms of like these are multiracial people and like these are identities, because I think Rice does a pretty decent job at like uplifting different voices. They don't always recognize like the intersectionality, so it's always like, oh, like LGBTQ plus groups, or like Black Student Association, but not like Black queer people and things like that. So I feel like multiracial people are like kind of fall into that realm of intersectionality just because we have multiple races. And I think Rice could do more in terms of just like talking to people about that, or even just having programming on campus that's like centered on that. Like, I don't know, I feel like less people would ask like, oh, what are you, or where are you from, if they like had that type of education. So yeah.
And just to specify, are you talking about the education of like monoracial individuals about the experience of being mixed, or kind of connecting the multiracial individuals?
I feel like definitely like both. Like I wouldn't necessarily say that Rice would have to like target this education towards monoracial individuals, more of just like making those resources like accessible on campus. So like inviting like a speaker who's multiracial to like talk about it or something, and like promoting it everywhere and things like that. Just like I guess connect the experience more.
And what do you enjoy about being multiracial, and what are more of the challenges of it?
I think it's like fun that I'm like, oh, I have like two cultures or like two things to talk about. And I don't know, it's like a really fun fact to share with people, and they'll be like, OMG, that's so cool. And I think, I don't know, I'm really like happy with it. Like I feel like I can be like, OMG, I'm multiracial, that's so cool of me. Like I don't know, I feel like it's like a little ego boost almost. I don't know why. But yeah, like it just feels like something that's really cool that I can share and be proud of, and I can like interact with two different cultures and they're like a part of me, which is something that's really cool, I guess, to me, like being able to just interact and learn so many different things. And I guess something that I don't enjoy is, I guess, like the sense of like otherness that you get from being multiracial sometimes, because I think I've like mentioned this a lot, but people like ask like, what are you, and blah blah blah, or they'll like just say very like weird things. Like I've had people make comments about my hair not being real, and they're like, you're Black, there's no way your hair could be that long, and I'm just like, actually my mom's hair is super long and that's where I get it from. And things like that I feel like are really like tough about being multiracial.
Yeah, kind of people enforcing stereotypes on you. Our last question, like, what are the things that you wish monoracial people knew about being multiracial?
That it can be like, I guess, really tough balancing like cultural expectations and cultural norms. So it's like, even though I am multiracial, I don't necessarily know every single thing about both races. Like I've had like Asian friends be like, how do you not know what this food type is? And I'm just like, what do you mean? And things like that. Just like, I don't know, like you have twice as many cultures, I guess, or however many cultures you're mixed with, to like interact with, but that doesn't mean that you know every single thing and like fully interact with every single thing to the same extent as someone who's like monoracial does.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in one of the other interviews, someone said that like people very much like they see through a lens, like they're like, oh, like I know monoracial people, so it's like you must be like a mix of both. And she was like, it's not necessarily that I'm a mix of both. Like sometimes I'm both, and sometimes it's neither. I think that's all the questions that we have for you today.
Okay.
I am African American, and I was told by my mother that I'm Native American. I am a little bit skeptical, but until I get a DNA test, I will go with it, and we'll see. But I don't really, I guess I don't really claim or associate with that side of me, even if it is true, because I just feel like I can't really relate to it. And then since I'm just, I just have a lot of like African American interactions, I would just feel out of place and not accepted, even if I did try to join Native American community.
And do you think you wouldn't feel accepted because of the way you look, or just that you don't have any cultural background with?
Maybe both, but primarily the first one, because I know in history books and such, the images, they look a lot lighter than me. And I don't know if people believe me. I already know there's a couple people who don't. I wouldn't look like a lot of the other people. And then I don't know anything about the culture.
Do you think that, because I know you said other people don't believe you, and so do you think it should influence whether or not you identify with that? If other
No,
people
because I still say it. People can say I'm wrong. I don't know if I am, but I love my mother, and I'm going to trust her, at least, like, mostly. So it's like, okay, if this is the skeptical scale, this side is believe, so it's like, believe, there's like a little bit of, you know, but I'll get it figured out, maybe next semester. You also can't really see, well, I mean, I guess to an extent you can see it, but you can't really see racial identity in that someone could have, like, a lot of things in them, and, like, things don't just, like, or people don't just look a certain way if they have certain identities, so you can't really just, you're not this, because you really wouldn't know.
And then how educated do you feel about your racial identities?
I'm tired of Native American, not informed at all. All there is, and specifically, I was told that I'm Cherokee, and I know those like things in history books, but in general, I really don't know anything. So if I had to do a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it a 1. And as far as being African American, I would say I'm pretty informed. My mom made sure to teach me a lot of history that we weren't taught in school, and make sure like I got other messages aside from just like slavery and civil rights. Like, there was a lot of other things that I was taught about like African Americans or just African people in general. So I would say, I don't know, maybe an 8, because I don't know like everything, but I think I am pretty well informed. And now together, I don't really count the Native American part that much, so I would still say like a good 7.5, because that 1 doesn't affect the 8 that much.
Do you have anything else to add on like the experiences that have shaped your understanding of your identity, and also the way that you express it?
Okay. Well, I don't really express the Native American side because I don't really know how I would do that. As far as I express being black, I guess it has changed over time because back home, even within my own immediate family, there's a lot of people who believe in gender roles and are pretty homophobic and things. So in the past, I would think I had to express myself a certain way, or at least hide things that I thought didn't fit into a mold of hypermasculinity. And maybe around the end of middle school, I just gave up because I'm like, I can't keep this up. And I don't care if you have an issue with it. Well, I mean, unless it'll put me in danger, then, But I just gave up, and I just decided to just be me. So I think I am now a little different than I was when I was younger, because I wasn't worried about, oh, does this seem feminine, or is this how I'm supposed to be? I'm just me, because this is how I'm supposed to be.
What are some stereotypes about your identity that you've experienced?
Oh, okay. So one stereotype, which I've experienced even from other black people, they think I actually am supposed to like fried chicken. I do like fried chicken though, but I don't like fried chicken. What else is it? I don't know, maybe mashed potatoes, but there's certain things that I guess like a lot of other people like. They're like, you don't like it? I'm like, no. And I just don't like it. I just people just assume I'm good at sports. Like, surely you're good at something. I'm like, no, I don't play sports. Or what else? Well, it wasn't like outwardly said, but sometimes, I do see people walk a little faster or So I mean, I try to stand like 10 feet away from people, you know, so they won't even have to feel. But yeah, I experienced that. Then I guess also sometimes people in the community have said like certain behavior is like not black or the cause certain things white. So I guess if I was interested in certain things that they feel like was lame.
How do you think monoracial groups view like kind of multiracial individuals?
Even though I tell people like I'm Native American, it's not like I mention it all the time. So sometimes people who like really know me know, or I might mention it sometimes when I come here, but I don't bring it up that much. So it kind of doesn't affect anything because most people's minds, whether they believe me or not, since I don't really mention it that much, they just see me as like African American,
I
I
see.
suppose. So it doesn't really impact me.
And do you feel like you're hiding that fact to kind of fit in, or what do you think is like the driving reason behind
Well,
that?
I think it's mainly because I don't really have much connection to it, and I don't know if it's like true yet. So it's not even necessarily what they're saying. I just want to know first. It's not about them. It's always about you.
It is always about you. And did you come into college feeling sure of your identity, and like has that changed at all since you've been at Rice?
Identity in general.
Yeah.
But as far as like, I guess who I am as a person, maybe certain things have changed or thought I was supposed to be a certain way. And I guess this isn't tied to identity, but I used to be a lot more like responsive in high school. And now, even though it's not like I'm too busy, I just don't have the energy or I don't feel as connected to certain people as I was. And it makes me feel kind of like an a-hole or something. So sometimes I wonder like, am I changing? Did I just like grow out of people or I don't know. So I guess I know my identity is just changing and evolving, but I do think I started to care more about integrity. I feel like that's very instrumental to my identity because I know when I feel like I'm doing things that I feel like are wrong, and like I genuinely feel really bad whether other people know or not, or if my friends, well, I'm not gonna say names, not friends, with random people telling me to sometimes use certain things that maybe we should or should not use, I say no because I know that if I start, well, for one, I don't want to do it, and then I know if I start, it might be an issue, you know. So I try to like stay true to myself, and I feel like I'm like kind of not answering the question. But in short, I don't know, but I feel like certain parts may become a little stronger, and certain things I'm just still figuring out.
And then, how do you feel Rice has shaped the way or changed the way that you view your racial identities?
As far as being Native American, I wouldn't say it changed it, but I guess since there are a lot of cultural groups or people who seem a lot more proud or likely to express the different identities, I suppose I feel better about it once I do get that documentation. As far as being African American, I do like that are a lot of cultural groups, and even though I never felt bad about being black, I do know that sometimes being like a very small group on campus can, doesn't always feel great, but I do like that there are like a lot of black organizations. So I feel like instead of making me feel kind of alone or like I'm fulfilling stereotypes by being like confused or struggling, I don't know, maybe as far as my time at Rice, I do feel a little more proud or happy or comfortable being black because of the organizations that are here.
And do you think there's anything that Rice could do more to kind of uplift the lives of multiracial individuals on campus?
Well, what could they do? Well, I don't know if it would be the actual institution, and I'm not sure if it's just students not wanting to start something, but I feel like sometimes a lot of multiracial people are just lumped together. Like it might just be a category on something, but it's not like they're the same because it's all these different identities. It's not just, oh, you're just multiracial, so you're all just together. Maybe if people did, well, I don't know, sometimes there may not be enough people in the same group, but people did make groups for different things, or I guess if they did make one like Forest Club and then have their different like subcategories, like celebrating all their different identities, that may help. Or I don't know, maybe if people just try not to box multiracial people all together.
Do you think one side of your identity is more accepted by society than the other?
Both my identities get treated like crap, honestly. I would say the black side is more accepted as in like believable because I mean you're not gonna say I'm not. But I don't think either are particularly accepted in the world because it's a little off topic, but I think it's the craziest thing. Like the bits and scraps that Native Americans are given as far as like opportunities here, considering that it's their land. But, yeah, so that's just to prove that Native Americans are treated well. And then as far as Black people, sometimes on campus, I see people make faces, and I kind of ignore them because I know I'm supposed to be here. But yeah, I feel like in general I would say like rice is accepting, and I don't really like get too many of those interactions. It's just like a little bit of a thing. And then in the world, depending on where I am, it does feel a little scary. But I guess by default, I would say the Black side is more accepted only because that's the side that people can see, and at least people would believe it more. But because outwardly, I probably just look African American. I do definitely identify more with my African American side.
What do you enjoy about being multiracial, and what do you dislike about it?
Just be cool. Like I am not saying being monoracial is boring, but I feel like sometimes, I don't know, just having something else to just spice up your life, it just seems really cool, you know? So I think I'll just be happy. Like, I don't know, it seems interesting. Especially since when I was like really young, I never really like even knew about it, so I think it'd be cool. And then me and my mom would bond. Like, Mom, you're right. She'd be like, I knew I'm right. So as far as the challenge, knowing if, you know, verifying it, but also just being African American, I feel like, I'm not saying we don't have, or I feel like I don't have a culture per se, but again, it feels like it's all just, whoever possibly don't take it the wrong way, but for me, it just feels like, you know, slavery separates soul food, and it feels like compared to a lot of other groups, like I feel like I don't have a culture, because I guess because a lot of our like background or like history is kind of like taken away from us since we like moved over here. I feel like we don't have like same level of traditions or just culture and customs that a lot of other groups do. So I kind of sometimes feel like, do I really have a culture? Because sometimes my culture kind of just feels like general American culture anyways, since a lot of people do, you know, like listen to Black music, eat Black food, and things like that. So it doesn't feel like the strongest culture.
If there was like one thing you could tell monoracial people about being multiracial, what do you wish that they would know?
Okay. Well, I'm gonna tell all of you that you can't just like look and like you're not this because you don't know. And in general, I think you should just believe people because, I mean, why not? Especially again, like if you ask them and they tell you what they are and you're like, no, then why did you ask? But you can't just identify things. Like a good example is in one of my classes, our professor was giving an example of different like skin tones of different like Latina women, and one of them like genuinely, we all, even the people in the Latin community, we all thought that she was white, and then one looked more like stereotypically Latin, and then one was an Afro-Latino. But the point of that is, since the categories are so broad, categories in general are so broad, you can't just look at people and know what they are.
So my racial identity, I usually identify as Black or Hispanic on most things, like all over Europe, all over Africa, and Latin America.
How educated do you feel about your racial identities, and do you think that your parents kind of fostered your understanding?
I feel pretty educated about my racial identity. My dad is Black from like DC, like the DC area, so he like grew up around a lot of Black people. And my mom is like where I get most of my like white from, but my mom is from the Caribbean, so she also grew up like completely surrounded by Black people. So I feel like my experience is like pretty unique being multiracial because my mom has like white skin, but she's very much like ethnically Caribbean and Black.
What experiences have shaped your understanding of your identity and the way that you express it?
When I was growing up, my mom like enrolled me in this program called Jack and Jill, and Jack and Jill is like a completely African American organization. So I grew up like around a lot of Black people, but the schools that I went to growing up, I was in like a mostly like majority white neighborhood. So like, I don't know, it's just like a lot of like back and forth and like code switching and stuff, and like, but definitely Jack and Jill and like growing up around Black people shaped my experience, and going back home to the Caribbean also shaped my experience a lot.
Could you go more into the code switching and kind of the dynamics of how that works for you?
Yeah, so the code switching thing is something that I learned when I was really little. My mom talked about it because in the Caribbean, like, they all have accents and stuff, but her grandparents and, like, her parents and her family all told her, or, like, made sure that she learned how to speak with an American accent and a Caribbean accent so that she would be, like, perceived as professional. And so with me, there's the, like, the black scent, right? Like, and so, like, when I'm in school or, like, in high school, like, around a lot of white people, like, I do not say the N-word. I do not talk with a black accent. And it's just a lot different versus when I'm in a group of black people. Like, I feel like I can just be that, like, different person, you know?
Mm-hmm. And how have those dynamics kind of played into, like, the way you participate in organizations here at Rice?
That is a great question. When I was a freshman, I really wanted to, like, join BSA and join, like, the Caribbean Society and everything, but I just felt like, I don't know, I felt kind of, like, disconnected from, like, that part of myself when I came to Rice, because when I was in high school, I was obviously in, like, all black organizations, and that was great. And then coming to Rice, I felt like, I don't know, it was just kind of, like, a disconnect. So I, like, stopped being active in those organizations and just started, like, focusing on school, I guess.
Did the disconnect come from your experiences within the organizations or just kind of something more within yourself?
It wasn't my experience in the organizations, like, that was fine. Like, I only went to a few meetings and, like, the organizations themselves seemed fine, but I think it was just, like, not having, like, a ton of black friends or, like, black people encouraging me to go to those things.
What do you think Rice could do to uplift the lives of multiracial students on campus? And, like, have they made any effort to make you guys feel accepted here?
I think probably the best all black experiences that I've had at Rice are, like, the Black McMurtry group. That's, like, mainly where all of my black friends are from, is that, like, Black Caucus group. But, like, in terms of Rice as a whole, I'm not really sure. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like a lot is being done. I'm just not participating in it.
And what leads to that non-participation? You're just finding yourself outside of those groups?
Yeah, it's mainly just, like, what I'm choosing to focus on, which is more, like, school.
Do you feel like Rice has changed the way that you view your racial identities at all?
I feel like no. I'm still pretty grounded in, like, my family and my siblings and how we all, like, perceive our racial identity. Rice has opened me up to, like, other cultures and, like, you know, seeing how, like, I fit into those other cultures, I guess. But there is, like, a pretty low black population at Rice, and even part of that black population, even less people are, like, mixed and, like, have, you know, the same experience. Like, a lot of people are, like, African, and, like, I don't know a lot about, like, African culture or anything, so it's kind of hard to, like, identify with that.
Just to wrap up, like, what is something that you wish monoracial individuals knew about the multiracial experience?
I would say just, like, how different it is.
I'm 75% white on my dad's side, and tracing that back, they came from Czechoslovakia as Episcopalian immigrants. But on my mom's side, or from my mom's side, I have Chinese heritage, about 25% of my genetic genome, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
My grandpa immigrated to America whenever he was very young. A lot of my, like, Asian side of the family who immigrated to America was not actually alive whenever I was born, because my grandpa died of an aneurysm whenever or my mom was 10. And then a lot of the people on my Chinese side smoked and got lung cancer, which I didn't have to go through any of that. My mom did. But so by the time I was born, the only surviving member from China in my family was my great aunt.
What experiences would you say have shaped your understanding of your identity and the way you express it?
So growing up, I pretty much just had a I'd say my identity was pretty defined as just a normal, like what you'd expect for a white upbringing, I guess, for the culture. But when I was around 12, I actually got to meet my great aunt that I mentioned earlier, who was the only surviving member from China. And she showed me a lot of the pictures and kind of what my family heritage was from that side. And so it was a little unique to have a completely different upbringing than what the rest of my family was from. And so I guess that perspective kind of just led to somewhat of an out of body or out of stance experience where it led me to reflect on kind of how I was brought up and how some part of my identity, I guess, that I never really associated with before, was just kind of not there, regardless of like what I'd been born with my genetic information.
And have you ever felt conflicted about your identity, and in what way?
So it was a little unusual, like I said, because I didn't have any of the like Chinese upbringing, or like that didn't affect me at all. And so whenever I learn about a quarter of my genetic history, and start to learn about kind of what my family went through and everything that they had with their culture growing up, culture and your racial identity can kind of play a part in building who you are with how you're forming yourself from your inner workings with your mind, but also your external environment. And so it was just kind of a strange experience, like I said earlier with one of our questions, to have that perspective put on me whenever I was 12.
Yeah. How do you feel like you kind of like worked through that and came to terms with that? Do you feel like you've come to terms with it?
I mean, I think it was actually really beneficial for me to kind of realize, oh, I had this specific upbringing, and like how I was brought up has shaped me in ways that other people haven't been brought up. And then especially going into high school, I mentioned that I was pretty much brought up in a white household, if I were to say, with the culture. But the white population there was actually one of the minorities. It was predominantly African American. And then I think it was about 33% white and then 25% Hispanic. And then the rest was other. And so going into that environment with a bunch of people who were different than myself, it kind of gave me a footing to go into it and think, oh, these people like had different upbringings than me, and they had a lot of different experiences, and they don't perceive the world in the exact same way I do. And so it led me to be more receptive kind of to what their perception was, and how there wasn't a right or wrong perception, even though they may be different. But I just was kind of more open to it and able to kind of understand what their point of view was more, be more receptive to it at least.
Do you feel like you've experienced any like external stereotypes about your racial identity?
Definitely nothing like too severe, just the occasional joke. I'm an engineer, so an occasional joke about being good at math, but I mean, nothing like bad, I guess, ever growing up. Like, I'm from Arkansas too, so I've experienced racism with all that goes on there, but none of it directed towards me. And so I can't really say that I have experienced too much bad because of it.
Mm-hmm. And do you think none of it's directed towards you because of the way that you look?
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. And so how do you feel that rice has shaped or changed the way that you view your racial identities?
I think it was just kind of the next stepping stone in that process of kind of understanding other people's perspectives with how they were different from me growing up and how they perceive the world and go through the world. And coming from like a smaller town, especially in moving to Houston, it's a whole lot different. And you meet a whole lot of new people who are not just from around America, but from around the world. And so it was kind of like almost a natural stepping stone into, okay, I've had these experiences with these people from back home, but now there's a whole lot of people that I'm going to be meeting at Rice who have a vast variety of different backgrounds. And so it was fun, I guess, for lack of a better term, to meet all these new people and to see like, oh, they're different from me in this way, and they have this upbringing with this culture, and it's so different from not only what I've heard, but like myself. And so it just kind of was a good progression, I guess, moving to Rice.
How challenging is it for you to find an organization if you're a part of like cultural groups on campus, where you feel like you're accepted?
It does seem a little. I feel like I said, I look white,
Yeah.
and so it's hard to like identify as that. And kind of as was mentioned before, I do a lot more of academic focus, and especially with an engineering degree, I find myself very busy with that. And
Yeah.
so balancing that. But I guess the flip side to that is, while I feel like I couldn't get involved with the groups as much because I look white, I don't look mixed race. A large majority of Rice's population I can identify with either both the Asian side or the white side.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not been a point where I've ever felt excluded, I guess, or alienated from the like student population.
What do you wish monoracial people knew about the experience of multiracial individuals?
I think what I wish they understood was kind of the whole rhetoric that I've been going on with everybody has a different upbringing, and their inner mind and their external upbringing has shaped them into who they are, and they don't perceive the world the same that you might, and the experiences they have are definitely not the same as you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's different and fascinating and unique, but it's not wrong just because it's different. There's multiple ways to go through life, and so for people who have a monoracial upbringing, I think the main takeaway would just be that other people have different experiences than you, and you should try to learn them and also respect them for the great and wonderful kind of aspects and stuff that they can bring with their personality.
How is the experience of like looking white but being multiracial?
My upbringing, I just went through very white culture, and like I definitely, people just perceived me as white, and especially when I was younger, like I said, I never met my grandpa, and so I didn't even know for a very long time that I was not white with part of my heritage. And I did have a friend from back home who was also Asian and white, but he was half Vietnamese, half white, and he didn't just look white like I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had a little bit of a different experience just being able to kind of identify with the Asian group at our school as opposed to the white group. But yeah, it's just like I don't see it affecting. It's like it's people from the outside. It doesn't really affect my Chinese heritage. Doesn't affect how they perceive me. It's all, oh, it's just a white kid.
Yeah.
And so like most people don't even know like I would be Chinese if I didn't like explicitly say. But yeah, he definitely had a different one than me, and he was also Asian or a different upbringing than me, and he was also Asian and white. But just because he looked different, people treated him differently.
I am half Hispanic, half Black.
Perfect. And what experiences have shaped your understanding of your identity and the way that you express it?
I would say one for sure is I'm pretty light skinned and my brother is not, and so growing up next to him, we both definitely look very different and get treated very different. And so I think that he has been allowed to like accept Black culture in a different way than I have, and it's just been like more readily available to him because he looks just a little darker than I do. But with that, I've been able to accept more of like my Hispanic heritage just because I do look mixed. And so I would say that like having a brother who looks darker, but we still have the same, ethnic identity has really helped having both of us get both cultures.
Have you ever felt conflicted about your identity, and in what ways?
Yeah, I think totally I have. I grew up not speaking some Spanish, but not a whole bunch, and it was always harder to learn because my dad doesn't speak Spanish and my mom does, and so I didn't grow up in a household where I was lucky enough to like have both parents speaking Spanish. And so a lot of times I was kind of just like, oh, like I just don't even want to like have to work hard to like know Spanish. Like I just don't. And if you don't necessarily like look Hispanic or something like that, it's harder to, I feel like, grasp onto that culture. And so a lot when I was growing up, I was always like, oh, I'll just be Black and I'll just like go with the flow and it's easier. I don't have to learn the language to be Black. I can just do it. And as I got older, I was like, oh, but now I like really, really want to like be able to be both. And so I definitely felt conflicted in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And how has that transformation kind of looked for you? Like, what are maybe things that you do now that you wouldn't have done back then because of that shift in perspective?
I think I just speak more Spanish. I mean, I feel like I hang out with more Hispanic people. I encourage them to try and teach me Spanish, and I try to work on my accent. I make jokes in Spanish. Like, I listen to more Spanish music. I ask my friends for Spanish music. Like, I'm just trying, there are like very active things you can do to learn more Spanish and to have it like more around in your life. And so I try to do things like that.
How do you feel in cultural spaces that are more monoracial? How do you feel that you kind of fit into them, into that? And are you accepted, or what's kind of been your experience?
I think that when I was younger, I was definitely a lot more insecure about places that were like only Black or only Hispanic. But I think as I've grown up, I've realized nobody really cares. And if you go into a space that is more Hispanic and you're just like, listen, this is me, and you chill and you can dance a little bit and you can, do whatever it takes to do it. I found that no one really cares, but definitely when I was younger, I was a lot more insecure and thinking that like people could tell that I was like, I don't know what to do. But as I've gotten older, that's kind of gone away from me.
Do you feel more connected to one of your races than the other, or kind of how do you balance that participation?
I definitely think I am perceived as a Black woman, and so I definitely feel more connected to Black women, and I share more experiences of just like hair and culture and beauty and stuff like that. So I definitely would say yes, I feel more connected to Black culture just like in society, but most of my family that lives near me is Hispanic, and so I do feel like culturally I have more ties to my Hispanic side just because my mom's side is all here and near me, and so like all the parties that I went to growing up or any of the events were largely Hispanic, but definitely out in the world I definitely feel more Black.
What is one thing that you wish monoracial people knew about the multiracial experience?
I think, I think there's a lot of like stereotypical like biracial kids that are like, I don't know what to pick, and it's like fun to make fun of them, and I like to make fun of them myself and whatever, but it is, you know what I mean? Like, it can be hard to pick and it can be hard to decide, especially depending on how you look. It's easier to be thrust into a category than to decide that you really are both and to, have that with open arms. But I think that it's fun to make jokes, but it is kind of real in a way.
What does being multiracial mean to you?
I think that it kind of means everything to me. I mean, I think about it a lot in terms of like what it means for like my kids growing up, and what it's going to mean that like they'll be able to speak Spanish and also be Black and all of these different things, and depending on who I marry and whatnot. But I just think it means that I get to be a lot of different things that other people I don't think necessarily get to be.
What are some of the things that you maybe dislike about being multiracial?
I think growing up, my mom's a Hispanic one and my dad's Black, and so my mom didn't really know how to take care of my hair. She definitely tried, and I definitely fought her on some points, so it's not all her fault. If my mom ever finds this video, please, But I think growing up, I just did not have hair textures that looked like anybody else that I knew, and I did not have someone who necessarily knew exactly how to take care of it and could like force me to like sit down and do my hair like what looked nice. And so I think that's definitely one thing I dislike. Like, even when I look back at pictures from me from middle school, I'm like, oh my God, like I didn't know what gel was, I didn't know what brush, I didn't know what anything was, and so it was like I was just struggling a little bit. But I think definitely just having like a older like woman adult that like knew what to do with my hair, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And how do external factors influence your experience with your racial identity?
I think for me, at least in high school, I went to a predominantly Hispanic high school, and because I didn't speak or I wasn't super comfortable speaking Spanish then, it was very easy to just be like, Karina is Black and that's it, and she's not Hispanic, and then I didn't feel very comfortable being in any sort of groups or speaking Spanish, because then I was like, well, I can't do it now, you know what I mean? But I would say outside factors, it's mainly just how people perceive you and how they, like, if I go to a place and I attempt to speak Spanish now, and they just don't, they're like, all right. And they'll just, like, speak English to me, stuff like that. Like, that doesn't necessarily happen to my brother, things like that, 'cause he looks real Dominican. And so, just, I think sometimes people perceive you a certain way, and so they won't treat you necessarily how they would treat a full Hispanic person or something like that, if they can tell.
Could you kind of describe like how you feel like being multiracial kind of impacts the way that you participate in cultural groups?
Yeah. So I'm part of BSU at my school. I go to the University of St. Thomas, and our BSU, St. Thomas is a really small school, and so you kind of get to be whatever you want to be at St. Thomas. It's kind of like we're really looking for people to like do anything. There's really not a lot of us, and so I feel at St. Thomas, it's honestly not really that big of a difference. It's like they will take anyone and everyone. Like our school is just so small, and I feel like at Rice you kind of get that too. It's relatively small, but I would say I'm just like allowed to do whatever groups I want to be a part in at St. Thomas. It's relatively easy to like just jump into those. But once again, I do think that it's the nature of like a really small school that they're like anybody and everybody we can get. Let's get them.
Okay. What are some stereotypes about your multiracial identity that you've experienced, if any?
Yeah.
I feel bad saying this, but I think a lot of the stereotypes for being half Hispanic, half Black are true. I don't have, I don't speak Spanish super duper well. I'm learning, I'm getting there, but I'm not like the most adept Spanish speaker. And so maybe just being like a no sabo kid or like things like that. And I think maybe other stereotypes about being biracial are just that you're just like in this like continual angst of being like, what am I? And like, that definitely can be true when you're younger, but I think the older you get, unless you're logic, but like the older you get, you kind of like grow out of that and realize like nobody really cares, and like so long as I feel comfortable in being both and like accepting both. But yeah, maybe that's probably the only stereotype is language.
So my dad is originally from Pakistan, and my mom is just like, I think that she has like Norwegian, kind of like Norse like identity, but she's like from the States. Like I think her parents came in like the 1800s, like, so they've definitely been around a while.
And what experience have you had that have shaped your understanding of your identity?
First of all, like my name plays like a really important factor. It's like Jasir Rahman, and it's an Arab name, which is like a Muslim name, because obviously like I am not myself Arab, but a lot of like Pakistanis and people who are Muslim will take on Arab names. And so I think that having that like part kind of like makes it very clear that I have from like some other identity, because I think that I can be like passing as a lot of things. Like I think that there are a lot of people like I've had like Nepalis, Mexicans, like people who are like just like white people think that like I'm kind of part of their group. But I think that like when you hear like Jasir Rahman, it's clearly not something that's like in the majority, which has worked like to my advantage and against my advantage. But I think that like my sister's name is Grace, and so I think that we've had very different kind of experiences, given that she has a name that's like, typically like, a name that like white people would have, an American name, whereas I've had like an ethnicized name. My brother and I think have had similar experiences in that regard. In terms of like experiences in like my expression of my identity, I think that, again, as compared to my sister, who I don't think had as much like kind of religious kind of teachings, I think that my dad tried to stress on like me and my brother a lot more, and I think that exposed us to people of like other people of color, but also kind of got us more in tune with like that sort of side of our identity. And I think that just having seen that kind of like binary, like, between me and my sister, I think it's like giving me like a pretty good insight into how that's kind of shaped how my identity is expressed.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of made your dad put you and your brother through those teachings, but not your sister?
I think you'd have to ask him, but I think that she's like 7 years older than both of us, so I think that he had like a lot more time to kind of like, I think he was more established here in the States at that point, so I think he was just like more experienced, and I think that he knew more of a community of people that were like of similar background to him, like when he was raising us, as opposed to like my sister. I don't think that he knew that like they had a Sunday school program probably when she was growing up, so I think that he probably just like kind of learned of these resources, and then we kind of like got to tap into them as they were like kind of made available to him and to us.
Yeah. Me and my sister are 11 years apart, and we were raised differently,
Yeah.
which is funny.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt conflicted about your identity, and in what ways?
I think that it's just kind of hard for me to like express how, like, because I don't think that I identify like with my like identity all the time like super well. I think that like being mixed has given me like kind of this ability to like kind of like code switch and just like be able to move in with like whatever group that I have, because I've had to deal with people on like both sides of my family and like different social groups, and I think that's given me this ability to kind of like, I don't want to say it's like washed out my identity a little bit. I don't know if that's the right word, because I still like understand my heritage and stuff and like that cultural aspect, but I think that it's made me less kind of in tune overall. I think that like in middle school, I went to a middle school. I'm originally from Kentucky, so I think that's not an area where there's a lot of like other people who look like me, or like just people of color in general. In middle school, I went to a very like predominantly white middle school, and I think that there was like a lot of people who would like make jokes about like my ethnicity and like stuff about like my religious background, and I don't think they really understood like like kind of my experience, and I don't think that I really had avenues to kind of like have other people who kind of had similar kind of backgrounds. But I switched high schools, and I switched like to a different high school, like a public high school that was like a lot more diverse, and it gave me like some more insight, and like I had some other people who like had similar experiences, but it still wasn't like exactly the same, and I don't think that I've really found anywhere that's like, I don't know, I felt like my like individual identity has been like expressed super well, and I don't think that that's something that I'm going to find. So I think that's just kind of a conflict that I found, is that I don't think that like there are some people who I feel like who might be of like one particular identity, they might be like Black, Asian, or whatever, and they like come to Rice, for example, and then they are able to find a space where they feel kind of like comfortable, and I don't think that like there's like anywhere like that where I'm like I would feel like I would fit in, but I also don't feel like I necessarily am like ever really an out group. I don't know, I'm just kind of caught in the middle. I think that I've seen more people who are like of my same like kind of ethnic identity. There's a lot more like South Asian people here, which is really cool. It's really cool to see all of this like cultural expression, and again, it's like people have experiences that are like completely different from my own. Like I think people like forget that like the South Asian content is like very, very like diverse. There's like tons of like different dialects. Like I had Nepali friends back home, but there's also people who speak like Tamil and are from like north and south. There's just so much different like, there's like no like homogeneity there. It's like very different, and so it's cool to just see that. And I think that that's kind of made me a little bit more comfortable, because even within like the people that I'm talking with, like you'll have like Pakistanis and like Indians like both like conversing, and like people are just like, oh yeah, like this is just like a cultural difference, like, oh, I didn't know that. And you would think that there would be like a lot of common ground, and there definitely is. Even when you think that you might be like completely like identifying with other people, there's like still a lot of differences there. I'm like a off and on member of SAS, like I'm not super duper involved, and I think that part of it is just maybe like the way that like my like freshman year went, and just how I was like kind of introduced to everything. I don't feel like I have like a lot of like cultural showcases to offer, because I think that a lot of the stuff like the Maka I think is in a few weeks, and I think that a lot of it is like cultural dance or cultural singing, and I don't really have training or expertise in those areas, whereas I feel like there are a lot of people like people at Riaz are like super cool, they're like fantastic, and I wish that I like knew Bhangra or whatever, but I don't. So I guess that kind of makes it hard to feel like I have something to contribute to those groups. But I definitely feel like if I wanted to like involve in like admin or whatever, or if I just felt like I wanted to spread the culture a little bit more, I think that I could, but it's not something that I super have the desire to do. And I don't know, maybe that's a function of like, that ambiguous identity. I don't think that it is. I think it might just be a personal choice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there are other people who like, again, are able to kind of like fit into those groups. I also think that like the Pakistani Student Association, there's not as much representation there. But I think that like there are obviously people who like fit into that group who aren't fitting into like the kind of SAS conglomerate as a whole. There's also like the Muslim Student Association. So I think that like that kind of branching of identities makes it hard to like have everyone kind of come together and bring a lot of stuff to the table. I know there's a lot of stuff too with like ASER right now too. There's like a lot of like interesting conversations that are happening. So I think like, I don't know, it's just kind of interesting. I don't think it's like necessarily unique to me, but I think that like there's just a lot of people where you have like these bridges of identity, like you can see it's kind of hard to navigate like what groups do I go to, who gets involved with who, stuff like that. I think overall like people are generally pretty accepting. I think again sometimes people like expect a little less of me, but then there are other people who are just like, oh yeah, you're like one of us. You like they'll like ask me, oh, have you seen this? Oh, have you seen this? I'm like, no, no, I haven't. Like, oh, do you speak like Hindi or whatever? I'm like, no, I don't. I know like a little bit, but like I think generally like at Rice it's like pretty accepting. I think that when it comes to people who are like from other like identities, I think that they assume a lot like more. It's like the opposite end of things, where it's like other white people or like other people like other identities would be like, oh, like, do you know this, and like pepper me with questions or something. I'm like, I don't know, like. So I think that it kind of depends.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like Rice has done a good job creating a space for multiracial individuals to kind of express themselves and maybe connect with each other?
I think especially now it's like very interesting because I think there's like tons of groups, which I think is good. And I think there's tons of ways to access things. I have like an OE kid that I advise who's like Hispanic, but he's also like, he has like Puerto Rican origin, and I think that he also has like, he has like some Palestinian like blood in him too, and there's like a lot of stuff going on there, and I think that like there's been stuff with like Hasera recently, again, is like the main thing that comes to mind for me. Sometimes like there's like specifically gaps between like international students expressing their identity. That whole situation, I think there's like people who are Spanish, like from Spain, and people who are like, Hispanic from like the United States who are like maybe from Mexico or something, where I think that like there are individuals who kind of set these divides in terms of like who can express who for what, and then like what that kind of means in terms of like privilege and stuff too. And I don't really know the answers, but I think that like sometimes that can make it hard to navigate. And again, I think that Rice overall I think has done a pretty good job, but I think that there's like individual groups where, given that everything's so student led, I think sometimes again like lines can be like drawn between like certain groups. There's differences in like like again like the Muslim Student Association, like Pakistani Student Association, in terms of like cultural practices or beliefs. But then there's also like the SAS also has like a different set of things where I feel like SAS is more generally like South Asian, like Indian specifically, and there's not necessarily always a lot of room for like the other groups to interact. But again, given that there's like so many different opportunities for like you to express your identity, I feel like it does like a pretty good job, and I think better than other universities. Like I have a friend at Vandy who says that like the Muslim Student Association, like the South Asian like Student Association is like kind of always butting heads, which is like really bad. But I don't think that there's like a same conflict here.
What do you wish people knew about the multiracial experience?
I think it's definitely like not a monolith. Identities are expressed in very different ways. Again, just even within my own family, like I've had very different cultural experiences from like all of my siblings. And I think it kind of depends on, sometimes, at least for me, I feel like in high school I kind of wanted to embrace my identity more and like learn more about my culture. And that gave me certain advantages with like, the people, like the South Asian people in my life. And it gave me different experiences than like my brother and sister who might not have necessarily had that experience. I don't think that we're always accepted within like each of our respective groups. And I think that can be like an uncomfortable position, but sometimes it's like it can be empowering too, because I feel like I can kind of weave between these worlds and like experience things. So it's like kind of valuable in some ways, and then other ways it can be a little bit uncomfortable. But I think just like embracing us for like who we are and like seeing us again as like human beings and not really defining us by our identity, because I've experienced both, where it's like people will just like kind of accept you as like this like kind of thing somewhere in between, and it's like completely fine, like you're just a human being. But then there's other people who will over like ethnicize you one way or the other, and that can be really frustrating. So I think just taking people as they are, I think it's just a general good rule of thumb.
I am mostly African American, but I'm about 25% Korean.
What experiences have shaped your understanding of your identity and the way that you express it?
Most of my experiences that have shaped my identity have been with family, because in school I mostly went to like predominantly white schools, pretty much in middle school, elementary school, and high school. So the only way I was able to really express my identity, or my Black side, was with family. And then my Korean side, I really haven't gotten to really express it or learn about it, because my grandma lives pretty far away, so we don't really get to see her that often. And so I feel like the only way I've really expressed that is by visiting her and getting to learn more about her experience, where she's from, and like, eating Korean food and all the, oh my gosh, Korean food is amazing. It's so good. Favorite type of food.
What's your favorite type of Korean food?
Probably like her fried rice with like bulgogi and kimchi and like the japchae. Amazing. So yeah, but that's really the only time I get to actually learn about it, is when I visit her. I don't think I've ever really felt conflicted about my identity. I think maybe the only time I felt conflicted is just because of, I guess, the way I look. And I feel like in my family I'm definitely the lightest, except for my dad. And so a lot of times I feel like I'm not regarded as like as Black as everyone else, even though a lot of my friends are like, I have a lot of multiracial friends, and so I'm technically actually more Black, but oftentimes it doesn't feel like that because I'm lighter than them. So I don't know, I feel like that's the only time I felt conflicted, is like I know that I'm Black and I'm also part Korean, but with like my skin tone, I feel like I can't really fit in either space sometimes because I definitely don't look Korean, but then I also don't really look like a lot of my family either.
How does that kind of play into finding groups here on campus?
In terms of my blackness, I've been able to find a lot of groups like BSA and like Black Women's Association. They're like very open, even though I haven't really gone to any meetings, they're very open. I feel like I do see a lot of mixed race individuals in at least the Black organizations. But in terms of the Korean organizations, I feel like pretty much all of the meetings, everyone is completely and fully Korean. They know how to speak Korean, their whole family is Korean, and they pretty much know the culture. So if I go to a meeting, I would just kind of feel like the odd one out. I wouldn't look like anyone. I wouldn't be able to really talk about it at all because I don't have much experience with it. So I feel like in terms of my Korean side, I can't really find any organizations that I would feel accepted into.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of my Black side, I feel like it's pretty good.
What do you feel that Rice could do better to kind of capture that multiracial experience and uplift it?
If Rice had more information about multiracial identity and the different ways that people express and experience it would be helpful. And I feel like if they even made more organizations or had more events that were specifically for multiracial individuals, I feel like that would allow individuals to embrace their identities more at Rice.
What does being multiracial mean to you?
It means that I have different cultures and different ways that I can experience my life and express myself, because Black side, I feel like I have a certain way of talking, a certain way of hanging out, I've got Black food, Black music, and then with the Korean side, it's very different culture, very different norms and food, and so being multiracial, I feel like allows me to be able to experience different cultures that I normally wouldn't have been able to experience or share with other people.
And what, if you could explain to monoracial people something about the multiracial experience, what would you want them to know?
I guess I would want them to know to not judge or assume what someone's identity is just by looking at them or just by the way that they talk or act or their upbringing. And to also know that there are specific sets of challenges and that multiracial people have to go through that monoracial groups don't. And so I feel like, and it's a lot of stuff that isn't spoken about or isn't really talked about at Rice or just in general. So I feel like just to try to understand and be open to other identities and the challenges that they face.
Mm-hmm. And can you go into some of those challenges?
For me, the most challenging thing would be being able to embrace both parts of my identity equally, because I do feel like because I'm technically speaking more Black, that I don't embrace the Korean part of my side like at all. Also being able to find people that I have the same experiences with. Also stereotypes, because I feel like anytime that I say I'm part Korean to someone, everyone's always like, oh, so you love K-pop. You must know BTS and stuff. I'm like, I don't necessarily like K-pop just because I'm part Korean. It's just like, I experience that every single time I tell someone that. They're like, oh, K-pop, BTS. And I'm like, that's not the only thing Korea is associated with. It's like, I don't know. I feel like that stereotype is it's very annoying. There's a lot of stereotypes about Korea just in general, especially with South Korea being so different from North Korea. And then, there's a lot of negative perceptions about North Korea. And that can people kind of associate that with South Korea, even though it's completely different. And so I feel like there's just a lot of stereotypes with regards to Korean culture and in general. People don't know about it.